are going to ask the questions when there is some pressure. Usually you don't worry about a cemetery's fate unless it's actually threatened. So I'm always kind of sad to take these calls because I know I don't have a lot of good news, right? We don't have a whole lot of power to stop some of this. But one thing is, of course, descendants are allowed access, and I'm sure that you tell this to your own constituents and people who call you, because there is still the idea that descendants own the family grave plot, right? They're still responsible for the maintenance of that tombstone and the maintenance of that family plot. Even if the whole cemetery is being taken care of by a certain organization or a church, like in Mr. Bradley's case. But yes, descendants should be allowed access, which means if you have to tromp through somebody else's property to get there, you should always ask for permission to do so, but they should by law allow you to. And then this is something that I came across with that little cemetery in the woods. There's a buffer of 10 feet around the graves that if a developer wants to build a big old mansion right next to a cemetery, they have to provide at least 10 feet, which is not that much if you're talking about a building. So you would hope that they would provide more than that. But 10 feet is the actual minimum required currently. But this requires, it should require, it doesn't actually require, it should require a survey of the ground, because sometimes you have unmarked graves. So just because it's 10 feet from the nearest marked grave doesn't necessarily mean it's 10 feet from the actual cemetery bounds. So bringing somebody in who has access to ground penetrating radar is expensive. And those people are not very common. But if that can be done, that's obviously the ideal that you would want. But at least somebody doing some sort of research into the deed records, the county assessor maps to see what the actual size of the plot in the cemetery in terms of like for tax assessing. You want to do some research to see, have the boundaries actually been documented before, and then does it match what you see on the ground? So, I would like to see a fence actually 10 feet away, and then they can be 10 feet away on the other side of the fence. But yeah, that's not always the case. The landowner can't move it unless it is quote unquote abandoned. And abandoned is a very, very vague term. Here are my Tennessee cemetery laws and burial site laws. The statutory laws from the Tennessee Code, Title 46. So this is from 10 Gen Web, and you can grab it on your way out if you want. But the landowner, also meaning like the developer, they can't really move it unless they can show it's abandoned, and how you show it's abandoned is really, this is where it's in the eye of the judge. I have seen cemeteries before that have been taken care of, they've been photographed, they've been documented, they've been cleaned, and yet the judge has still deemed, you gotta move it because of pressure of development. There's one example I can think of that happened in Nashville. So not that surprising in Nashville, unfortunately, because of the rampant development there. But this is where Jason Church, when he came out and did his presentation to us, said that even just taking a photograph of the different graves or the cemetery, especially one that's time-stamped, that can go a long way to being able to argue it's not abandoned, we just documented it last year. And so all the attention being brought to a cemetery like Mount Olive, it's never abandoned technically because it's always being thought of, researched, taken care of. They have regular community events every year. So get somebody in there, document it, put it on file, create a file for it. Like, look, it's not abandoned. But again, it's going to be up to the judge. Oops. Okay.